All right, folks, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to lead with just a few quick points about the California Transit Association. Though, of course, this is an association-hosted webinar, we do have participants who are from other organizations, whether it's state and federal government, or folks that are members of the California Hydrogen Business Council. So for those of you who don't know, California Transit Association is a trade organization comprised of about 200 members, all in the transit space. That includes about 80 transit agencies, but also OEMs, fuel providers, technology providers, and part suppliers, basically anyone that touches a transit vehicle or the transit industry. Our primary role is advocating for state and federal policies that support and advance public transit, and at times that does include funding to advance technologies like fuel cell electric buses. We've been heavily engaged in discussions around zero-emission bus deployment for some time. We led negotiations with ARB on the development of the Innovative Clean Transit Rule, for example, and since then, we've been focused on how best to support our members on implementation of zero-emission technology. We see it as being a three-pronged approach, relying on outreach and education through things like this webinar, but also advocacy for state funding to actually advance these types of zero-emission bus projects, and then also tracking and documenting compliance issues so that those can be raised to the appropriate regulatory bodies, and that hopefully we can come to some reasonable solution for them, either through policy or through new funding mechanisms. I want to go over very quickly how to ask questions during this webinar. You'll see at the far right of your screen a box that looks very similar to what's on your screen here, that is in a red box. That allows you to ask questions throughout the duration of this webinar. We'll be harvesting questions as they come in, and at the very tail end of this webinar, we'll have a Q&A session that will be between all panelists, and we'll be reading those questions for the panelists, and folks will be jumping in and responding as appropriate. So again, feel free to ask questions throughout the duration of this webinar. Note that we won't be asking those questions after each speaker, but rather reserving them for the very tail end of the presentation. At this time, I'm going to hand things over to Emmanuel Wagner from the California Hydrogen Business Council to give an overview of his organization and why it is that they sought to partner with us on this webinar series. So, Emmanuel, I'll hand things off to you.
All right, thank you very much, and also welcome from the CHBC and from me to all the attendees for today's webinar. Appreciate the introduction. I'm going to also keep my remarks very brief. I'm the Deputy Director of the California Hydrogen Business Council. We're the trade association for the hydrogen industry in California, and we are very excited to work with CTA on this four-part webinar series on fuel cell electric buses and infrastructure. And we look forward to your participation in the next or remaining two webinars. CHBC is a member-based association as well. We are dedicated to commercializing the hydrogen fuel cell technology in the energy and transportation sector in California. That includes freight, transit, and stationary power. We also focus heavily on advocacy action in Sacramento and on the local level. And our advocacy is centered around four specific initiatives, which you can see here. We also have sector action groups, as we call them. Those are on goods movement, heavy-duty transportation, clean ports, energy storage with hydrogen and renewable hydrogen production, and most relevant for this group, public transport. We have over 100 members from every part of the hydrogen fuel cell supply chain, as you can see on the next slide, including manufacturers of fuel cells, electrolyzers, and vehicles. Also gas and electric utilities, station developers, agencies, component suppliers, and public transit systems. and over here on the left, you can see their logos. We have developed a fact sheet for interested parties like yourself that talk about the technology. You can see the slide, you can see the link and fact sheet on the next slide. That covers in more detail the technology. I won't go into a lot of detail here. If you want to take a look at this after the webinar, I highly welcome you to do so. And we developed that with the California Fuel Cell Partnership. On the next slide, you'll see just a couple of takeaways from the webinar we held last week, Thursday. If you haven't attended that, I welcome you to take a look at it. It provided a sort of a high-level overview of the technology and the considerations. Basically, the gist of it is that fuel cell buses have been in operation for more than a decade, or almost 2 decades in California. There are approximately, by the end of the year, 40 fuel cell electric buses in operation. You can consider this not a demo, but a commercial technology. They have been performing well, and we would like for you to, after today's webinar and this webinar series, consider this technology, to be added to your planning for the ICT program. So I want to highlight that we do, as an association, of course, conduct a number of events. Most relevant, and you can see those here, most relevant, though, is the one that's called the Other Electric Bus, meeting California's ICT regulation with fuel cell technology. That will be hosted around November 2019, and we would be happy to share more information and welcome you at that webinar, at that meeting. And with that, if you have questions, please feel free to connect with CHBC or myself. The contact information is here, and we would be happy to answer questions that you have that may not be answered by during today's webinar. But with that, I'll hand it over to our next speakers, our great set of speakers, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Emmanuel, for that overview of CHBC, and we of course are excited to be partnering with you on this webinar series. Folks, the next speaker we've got teed up for you is David Warren, the Director of Sustainable Transportation at New Flyer of America. David has worked closely with our association on both the development of the Innovative Clean Transit regulation and now in its implementation. He has a seat on the association's Zero Emission Bus Task Force, so we're excited to have him here today. Now, before I hand things over to David, I do want to note for you all that you're going to get a ton of really great information through this webinar, and we will be making the PowerPoint available to you after this webinar, and that will be posted on the association's website and blasted out to our members via our Executive Director's report early next week. We'll also have a recording of this webinar that will be available to any of your colleagues or folks who weren't able to join us here today. So with that, I'll hand things over to David. And David, if you want to just go ahead and jump into your presentation, be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Well, it's a real honor to participate today on this webinar, especially with AC Transit and the National Renewable Energy Lab. I hope today that you have some takeaways about the technology. My intent is to provide you factual information about our experience, about our philosophy of how we design fuel cell electric buses, and I look forward to questions later on in today's session. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about our involvement with the state of California. And first of all, on behalf of New Flyer, we are all in on fuel cell electric buses. We see the value of these as a nice complement to battery electric buses, and we've certainly invested a lot of our resources in developing this technology and now deploying it in commercial applications. We've worked very closely with the California Air Resources Board and the California Climate Investment Program, the Center of Transportation and the Environment, and the work that they have done in supporting various hydrogen fuel cell electric programs in the state of California, as well as CalSTART. New Flyer worked very closely with CalStart on a 60-foot fuel cell electric bus that is now in the possession of AC Transit that went through the Altoona test protocol. And so they have also been very good partners with us. The California Fuel Cell Partnership, the work that they're doing to put together the fuel cell electric bus roadmap, and of course the California Hydrogen Business Council. All of these organizations we've been intimately involved with and working with for several years to get to the point to where we are with commercial deployment. If you're not aware, New Flyer over the past year and into late 2018 will have delivered 25 fuel cell electric buses to Octa, Orange County, AC Transit up in the Bay Area, and Sunline out towards Palm Springs. So we're very proud that 2018, 2019 were really breakthrough years for this technology. I want to mention that in the state of California, we have delivered over 80 battery electric buses. And the reason I want to point that out is that a fuel cell electric bus is essentially a battery electric bus with an onboard battery charger. We essentially use the fuel cell to create electricity, to charge the batteries, to operate the bus, and I'll get into more of that here shortly. We do have 4 locations in the state of California. We have facilities in Ontario, Los Alamitos, Fresno, and the Bay Area. Support for this technology is going to be hugely important from both a parts and a service standpoint to maintain these buses and to have the reliability that everyone expects from this technology. I want to just briefly mention that fuel cell electric buses has a long history with New Flyer. In 2009 through 14, we had an active program with BC Transit on the deployment of 20 fuel cell electric buses. Our level of integration into that project is different than it is now, but nevertheless, we have that experience of deploying a large fleet of fuel cell electric buses. And at the time in 2010, this was the world's largest deployment of a fuel cell electric bus fleet. And from that experience, we take away some lessons learned and different theories of how we would approach this in the future, which the future is now. So what we really gained from that experience back in 2010 timeframe was that New Flyer as an OEM and complement to our work and development of the battery electric bus, that we needed to take ownership of the systems, controls, and integration. So that wasn't necessarily the case back in 2010 and how we were working with some of the technical contributors to that program. But we walked away from that realizing that if this was going to be successful, we had to have full integration control. We learned about the serviceability of the buses from Vancouver and British Columbia, and that maintaining the buses and having access to serviceable components was a very big deal, and that's reflected in our new designs. The ownership of the fuel cell balance, the air, the cooling system for the fuel cell itself, it was important for us that that type of control essentially be transferred to the fuel cell supplier. So the other part of that was the development of the electric accessories. Some of those accessories back in that time frame weren't necessarily up to the 12-year type expectation that we had for that technology. So we very methodically studied what type of components were needed to make the fuel cell electric bus a 12+ year life product. And so over that course, we've learned a lot about the energy consumption and what it's going to take to make these buses reliable. When we look back on how we did things in that time frame versus how we're doing now, I'd like to give you a little bit of an update on essentially what has changed in our philosophy. When we deployed buses back in 2010, it was a fuel cell dominant hybrid. So in other words, we relied very heavily on a larger sized fuel cell to do the work. And back in that time frame, it was a 150 kilowatt fuel cell. Our new design is essentially to have a smaller fuel cell with a larger battery pack. And again, as I said earlier, we use the fuel cell really as the onboard battery pack. So when we had the buses back in 2010, we had just a single battery string. And now on our buses, whether 40 or 60 foot, we have up to 150 kilowatt hours of batteries on board to complement the hydrogen that's on board. So with this, we've seen some strong performance advantages, up to 235 kilowatt peak power. And we've seen some very good improvements in the extended range of these buses. So early in 2019, we introduced our new line of fuel cell electric buses. And this product is called the Excelsior Charge H2. And it applies to both the 40-foot and the 60-foot version of these buses. Both buses have been through Altoona. That's public information that can be downloaded from the FDA website. I encourage those interested in that to do that. And if you have questions about the results of those tests, to please contact New Flyer and we'll walk you through how the bus did, what changes have occurred since those tests. But overall, we're very proud of the successful launch of the Charge H2. When we look at the overall status of where we are in the deployment of fuel cell electric buses, we'll start with what's in development and production builds. We are working with multiple fuel cell suppliers. Hydrogenics and their Celerity is a project that we have on our 40-foot bus. This is a project that was funded in part by the California Energy Commission. It will be delivered to Sunline Transit by the end of this month. So that project is advancing well, and we'll get some in-service experience with the Hydrogenics fuel cell. It has not been through Altoona yet. It'll happen as soon as Sunline's evaluation is complete. And then we do have production, Altoona qualified testing that has been done with the Ballard HD 85 fuel cell in both the 40 and the 60 foot. This is a chart here, or a graph here that just roughly compares the two technologies, a battery electric to a fuel cell electric. The first thing I'd like to share is that, these are very complementary technologies. We may see a situation where transit agencies will run both short-range, long-range battery electric buses, as well as fuel cell electric buses, depending on what the application is. But on a battery electric bus, our current state-of-the-art, we see the range of this type of technology as 220 miles for a battery electric bus per the FDA protocol. With a fuel cell electric bus, we have range capability up to 350 miles. So that's a nice advantage to this type of technology. When we look at the fill time or the charge time of the bus, battery electric buses with a lot of kilowatt hours of batteries can take up to 4 hours to charge. With a fuel cell electric bus, to fill it with hydrogen, and there is no need to hook it up to the grid, but to fill it with hydrogen, if it's an articulated bus, On the long side of it, it could take up to 20 minutes. If it's a 40-foot bus, closer to 12 minutes or less time to charge the bus. And then another big advantage of these of the fuel cell electric technology is that you know, when you start looking at trying to scale up a fleet of buses, whereas a battery electric bus may require one charger for every 2 or 3 buses, the scalability of the infrastructure for hydrogen, as Sal and others and Chris Peebles might be able to speak for, the ability to scale up the infrastructure for hydrogen starts becoming a little bit more attractive and perhaps more of an advantage in a large fleet compared to battery electric. Okay, this slide here shows both our 60 and our 40-foot bus. It's very small print here, but there's a couple takeaways I'd like you to have from this this slide. Number one is a lot of these components that you're seeing on both the 40 and the 60-foot fuel cell electric bus are the same exact components as our battery electric bus. Essentially, the propulsion system remains the same. The battery energy storage system may be less, but the way it's integrated into the bus is exactly identical to the way we would do it on a battery electric bus. On the 40-foot bus, there's essentially a range of, battery electric bus. We would have up to 100 kilowatt hours of batteries on a 40-foot bus, and up to 120 on a or 150 on a 60-foot bus. Pardon me here, my screen went blank on me here. So on a as far as hydrogen, a 40-foot battery electric bus would have 38 kilograms of hydrogen, and then on a 60-foot bus, up to 120 kilograms of hydrogen. Okay, my apology there. My screen went blank, and it is now back. So, okay, now Altoona range on the bus. This is the slide looks a little bit odd on my screen, but this is the Excelsior Charge. This is a 60-foot configuration. Now, Altoona has different types of duty cycles: central business district route, arterial roads, commuter routes, and then the average. So the testing of our 60-foot bus shows a range capability of 317 miles. And essentially, that's over 100 miles further than a battery electric bus. And the other thing I want to point out is, compared to a long-range battery electric bus, these fuel cell electric buses can be up to 1,200 pounds lighter weight because of the energy density of the hydrogen versus the batteries. So that's another strong advantage to this type of technology. So that bus is currently in the hands of AC Transit, and they will demonstrate it in service for a 2-year period. All right, the next slide shows the 40-foot Excelsior Charge H2. And again, there's different routes: the Manhattan, the Orange County, and the UDDS, slightly different Altoona protocols, but the average fuel economy on that bus was 262 miles per the Altoona test. But what I'd like to share with you is that Orange County, we did a demonstration with Orange County and replicated service with that bus, stopping at prescribed bus stops, just like the bus would act in service. We had load on the bus. The range of that bus was 350 miles in replicated service. And so we were able to obtain 330 miles from the hydrogen, that 38 kilograms of hydrogen, and then an additional 20 miles of extended battery range capability. So 350 miles in total in replicated customer service. So we're very proud of that. The results of this, the efficiency of the Ballard fuel cell actually exceeded our overall expectations. And these buses are being prepared for revenue service as we speak. I think this is my last slide, but what I want to share with you is that we at New Flyer do see that this gap between a battery electric, long-range battery electric bus and a fuel cell electric bus is converging. We do see reductions in the fuel cell cost. The batteries continue to come down, which benefits both types of technology, the fuel cell electric and the battery electric. With volume, the fact that we were able to build 25 fuel cell electric buses, we do see some improvements in our ability to manufacture and assemble these buses in a very much more efficient manner. Those costs will come down with a fuel cell electric bus with additional quantities as well. And so, you know, we do also see this supply chain. We love the competition that's going on right now. We're not the only fuel cell electric bus manufacturer, and there's more than one fuel cell supplier. So that type of competition and what's going on in the trucking industry and automotive, all of that will benefit fuel cell electric buses for the transit market. So with that, we'll hold off for questions. I look forward to talking to you more about this. I would like a shout out to Erin Cook. Erin was our project manager for the fuel cell electric bus program. She did a fantastic job, and she has really represented the industry well in this technology, and can't thank her enough for her contribution, not only now, but for the years to come in the deployment of what we hope to be many, many more fuel cell electric buses. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David, for that presentation. And again, really appreciate the partnership that we as an association have had with New Flyer, especially with your position now on our Zero Emission Bus Task Force. Now, for folks on the webinar, our next speaker is Leslie Udy from the National Renewable Energies Laboratory. She's a senior project leader who's overseen quite a bit of work on fuel cell electric bus deployment here in the States, and particularly here in California. So at this time, I'm going to turn things over to Leslie to perhaps give some more background on herself, the work that she's done at NREL, and then some of the findings they've had from their evaluations. Take it away, Leslie.
Thank you, Michael. So as he mentioned, I work for the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. We're one of the DOE laboratories focused on energy efficiency and renewable energy, and I work within the Transportation and Hydrogen Systems Center, and my work is focused on fuel cell and battery electric buses. But we started out with fuel cell electric buses back in early 2000s with Sunline and AC Transit. So we've been working with this technology for some time. This presentation is going to show you some of our more recent results from in-service data collection from a number of transit agencies. So first, what's NREL's role in a zero-emission bus evaluation? We're basically third-party evaluators of advanced technologies. We like to look at those in real-world service. We use an established evaluation protocol that provides a consistent data collection. So when you look at one of our reports, you know what you're going to find is a handful of data items that you will see in all of our reports, so it's easily comparable. Unbiased results. We compare the evaluation of the advanced technology to conventional technologies in similar or same service as close as we can get. And then we also compare them to the technical targets that were set up by the Department of Energy in working with the Department of Transportation through the Federal Transit Administration. We have a number of audiences for the reports and the data that we produce. The transit agencies, we like to share that information so that they can make informed purchase decisions and understand how the technology might work in their system. For government, we like to give them the feedback and show them what the status is, and that helps them to prioritize funding for future R&D. So if there's something we're seeing issues with, they can provide funding to hopefully address those issues. And then for the OEMs such as New Flyer, we collaborate with them and help them understand the status in real world service and share that data with them along with the information on the baselines and the similar service. Our data collection process involves working with the transit agencies and the other partners to collect a number of different fueling or different records. Here's just a list of what we collect of the fueling records that helps us get the cost and efficiency calculations. We collect all the maintenance records, and then we look at that cost per mile overall and by separate systems. We look at daily use and bus availability. That helps with understanding the reliability of the buses. Also, road calls, it gives us the miles between road call, another measure of reliability for transit agencies. And then we collect fleet experiences to get those lessons learned. The idea is that what the early adopters, such as AC Transit, what their lessons learned are can help other agencies avoid some of those early pitfalls and move forward with the technology. So the results summary we're going to talk about in the next couple of slides involves 4 fleets that we've been working with over a several year period. The table shows those different agencies. Now, AC Transit, the buses that we've worked with are their earlier versions, Van Hool buses. We're only collecting the fuel cell hours and some fuel cost data for this presentation. For Sunline, Orange County, and Stark Area Regional Transit Agency, which is in Canton, Ohio, they're all operating the El Dorado version, the American Fuel Cell Bus version. So for all 3 of those, we've got all the data. For Sunline, we have removed the first bus, the prototype bus, so that we can look at the data from the newer buses. And so that's the data summary you'll see in the next couple of slides. One of the things of interest to DOE and to the transit agencies is how well does the fuel cells last? It was certainly a concern with some of the earlier fleets where the fuel cell OEM felt like they were lucky to make 2,000 hours, and we've seen some huge progress over the last few years. So this chart shows you for each bar is the total fuel cell hours on the power plant at the end of, let's see, the slide's slightly cut off for mine, but this is as of the end of April 2019. So we can see that the blue bars are for the AC Transit's Van Hool buses, and then Sunline and OCTA's original bus, and then SARTA. They're newer buses, so those hours are lower, but AC Transit has achieved some amazing results with their buses. We've got a bus that's over 32,000 hours. Sal can talk more about that when he gets to his presentation. But this is really nice because we see 10 fuel cell power plants have surpassed the ultimate target, and that was the idea, was to get it through about half of the bus life. So we know that these power plants can do what they were designed to do. Another reliability measure is miles between road call. And this chart shows the DOE and FTA targets for 2 different metrics. One is the miles between road call for all bus road calls, and that's the lighter blue line at the bottom. And if you look at the green line at the top, that would be if you looked at road calls that were only due to the fuel cell system itself, and that would include the fuel cell stack and the balance plant components. And so this tracks the cumulative miles between road call over time. So you can see that for the bus miles between road call, they surpassed that ultimate target back in 2015, and it stayed pretty steady above that target of 4,000 miles between road call. For the fuel cell system, it's had some ups and downs. Part of that is due to lower mileage. In the beginning, there was only a few buses in service, and then we've added them in as they've been put into service by the different agencies. And so with the lower miles, sometimes a road call can cause that dip. But you can see it's been pretty consistent between the interim target and the ultimate target, and we expect that to rise over time and settle out. Most of the fuel cell system problems, actually all of them, have been caused by balance of plant components. We have not seen any stack issues. One of the things that's a big challenge for transit agencies is the cost of hydrogen. DOE has set a target of $4 per kilogram. We have not seen that yet, although some of the data fluctuates, so we can see that for some monthly data. What I have here is looking at each of the transit agencies and the data that they give us. And so each column is the data for that particular period. And then we've got the average cost per kilogram during that period, the maximum cost by month, each of those would be by month, and then the minimum cost per month. So you can see that there is some fluctuation. One thing to note is that the data provided isn't exactly equal comparisons for Sunline. It's their older station. They own and operate that station, so it includes O&M cost. AC Transit and the SARTA are delivered costs. And then for OCTA, unfortunately, during this early first demonstration, they did not have a station. They're in the process of building the station, so they've been forced to go to local retail stations, which is showing you that's definitely not the way to go, because the retail stations have much higher cost. But if you look at the blue rows, that's for the fuel cells and the hydrogen cost. And then the orange would be the equivalent baseline technology cost. And if you look at the rows that are outlined in red, that's the primary comparison between the cost per mile for hydrogen for the buses in that particular fleet compared to their cost per mile for their baseline bus. So you can see that right now with the cost of hydrogen, it's still more expensive per mile to operate fuel cell buses. So this chart shows a chart for each of those agencies, and it's the monthly cost per mile for hydrogen in blue and for the baseline in orange or gray. SARTA has hybrids also, so we've tracked that separately. So the low cost for diesel and CNG fuel certainly makes that lower. But this really shows you how you can get some serious fluctuation if you're including the O&Ms. That's why Sunline's cost goes up and down. If they have a maintenance event and they don't have much hydrogen dispense, that causes that cost to go way up, whereas your delivered cost is much more stable over time. So switching to maintenance cost, this chart shows the maintenance cost by individual system, and you can see in the chart the colors and what each of those colors stand for. And at the bottom we have the fuel cell electric bus. There's the line for CNG baselines, for diesel baselines, and I've included one of our battery electric bus fleets that we've been collecting data on for several years, and you can see the number of buses in each of those fleets. We use a standard labor cost of $50 per hour just to make it consistent across fleets. That's not the actual cost that a transit agency would have. They can take those hours out and put their own numbers in based on what we produce in our reports. But you can see for the fuel cell electric bus, the most of the cost at this point is from propulsion-related systems. The diesel buses have propulsion-related and cab body and accessories. The CNGs are pretty even between cab body, propulsion-related, and hours for preventive maintenance. And then the battery electric buses have some of those same numbers with a lot more cost for tires. For the fuel cell buses, the cooling system problems have fall into that propulsion category. They've had issues with low voltage batteries and some balance of plant components. Other issues outside of that include problems with the bus air compressor and the suspension. This chart shows the maintenance cost trends for a number of the fleets that we've been working with. So the dark blue line would be the cumulative cost per mile for the fuel cell electric buses. And then we've got two different CNG bus fleets. One was a 2008 model year, and then the other one was a 2016 model year, and then a diesel fleet that we've followed for a number of years. And then I've included that battery electric bus fleet since we've got multiple years. And since we didn't operate these at the same time, we've basically set them all as start of service and into months. So that would go out through 75 months for the one fleet. So we have a couple stages to look at. If you look at the fuel cell electric buses in stage 1, you've got very low miles. It's an introduction of a new technology. So we see some higher costs in the beginning as the transit agencies sort of coming up to speed. Then when you get to stage 2, it levels out. The miles are increasing. Most of the repairs are still handled under warranty. And then stage 3, you see some climb with the learning curve for troubleshooting as the agency's taking on more of the repair and those buses are maybe running out of warranty. You look at the CNGs and the diesels, that's kind of what you expect to see for a commercial technology. Low in the beginning and then just a gradual increase with time as the buses age. Now, for comparison, the electric bus fleet in the green, you can see at the beginning, stage 4, they're very low maintenance cost. At that point, there were OEM staff on site doing all of the major repairs, and so the costs are really low. And then over time, we've seen that cost climb as the agency takes over and the warranty period ends. We've seen some fairly high cost to parts that have caused that number to go up. So what are the technical issues that are affecting costs for the fuel cell electric buses? I mentioned balance of plant components on the fuel cell, things part of the air handling or the cooling, blowers, compressors, controllers, pumps and plumbing issues have been some other problems. For the electrical system, a lot of problems are involved, the low voltage batteries. When you have all this IT equipment, cameras, fare boxes, radios, it all wants to drain that battery and shortens that battery life. This also affects the battery electric buses and was part of the reason for the climb in cost in the fleet that you saw in the chart before. Some cooling system leaks, depending on where the agencies operate them, are difficult to locate because of a hotter climate. Sunline doesn't see pooling, so it's hard to find a cooling system leak sometimes. I mentioned the bus air compressor. While it's a bus component, because it's electrically driven, it's more expensive than the standard bus compressors. And then, of course, added hours for troubleshooting problems. I expect those to drop with time and familiarity of the technology. The remaining challenges and barriers for industry to fully commercialize fuel cell electric buses. David mentioned larger fleets. We know those costs will come down with higher volumes. In some cases, and agencies could combine orders to get more buses in a specific order would be very helpful, and that a larger fleet can also help a transit agency accelerate that learning curve for their staff. It's easier, I think, to train for more than one bus in a fleet. Sometimes it's a challenge to have, a 1 bus or a 2 bus fleet when you've got a large fleet. Incorporating training for fuel cell electric buses into standard maintenance training, we're seeing that happen now, and I think that's going to definitely help moving forward. Then we mentioned the cost of hydrogen. Installing a hydrogen station is really difficult because it's a really large upfront cost, but it's easier to scale up compared to a battery electric fleet. There are some things that transit agencies could do, such as a turnkey station where the fuel provider owns and operates. That can help stabilize cost. Also, long-term fuel contracts, such as what you have for diesel or CNG. And then station utilization. The higher volumes could mean a lower per unit cost. And that was the end of my presentation. There's a lot more data that we have in our reports, but tried to limit it to some snippets that I thought might be of most interest. I look forward to questions at the end.
All right, thank you, Leslie, for that really fantastic overview of the evaluations thus far. Folks, I do want to remind you that you do have the ability to ask questions throughout the duration of this webinar. We're currently harvesting questions as they come in, and we'll be taking them at the very tail end of this webinar. So next up for you, we've got a presentation from the folks at AC Transit, and we're joined today by 2 fantastic representatives for the agency. We've got Chris Peoples, who is a director on AC Transit's board of directors, as well as Sal Yamas, their COO, who also has been very plugged in with the association as we've developed our position on the Innovative Clean Transit Regulation, and AC Transit currently retains a seat on our Zero Emission Bus Task Force. So at this time, I'll hand things over to Chris and to Sal to go through their own experiences deploying fuel cell electric buses.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Chris Peoples. I'm an elected at-large director of AC Transit. We're one of the 3 bizarre transit agencies that have directly elected boards. With me today is Sal Lamas, our Chief Operating Officer. I'm going to talk a little bit about what AC Transit is and how we're set up, and then go into the history of our fuel cell program. Sal is going to talk about our experience and the metrics we've used and all that, and is going to talk about the great training program he's put in place here. At the next seminar, you'll have a chance to hear from Joe Calloway, who's our Director of Capital Projects, but before that was the construction manager on all of our hydrogen facilities, so he can tell you a little bit about how to build the infrastructure. And in the last webinar, you're going to hear from Chris Andrzejczyk. Chris is our budget director, but before that, he was our grants manager. So he can tell you a little bit about how to pay for this stuff. All right, a little bit of history. In the late 90s, well, no, all right, a little bit about the district. We're a legislatively created special district that provides bus transit service to the western parts of Alameda and Contra Costa counties. That's on the east side of the San Francisco Bay. We're a medium-sized transit agency. We serve about 1.5 million people. We've got about 364 square miles. We provide that service with 637 buses and a total head count of about 2,200 employees. Our annual budget is about $600 million. We provide local service within our area and Transbay commute service into San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties. The history, this thing got started. CARB in the late 90s was trying to convert everybody to CNG. The Bay Area properties decided that was not a good fit for them because of their heavy loads and lots of hills. So we went up and negotiated on behalf of all the San Francisco properties a diesel path. And what that did is we could continue to use diesel buses, but it came with 2 conditions. One was that the diesel engine manufacturers had to clean up their particulate matter pollution and their criteria pollution. And they had a series of milestones for that, and they've met all of those. And we were supposed to do a zero emission experiment. The zero emission experiment was our fuel cell process. Next slide. We started out with a little 30-foot door that we inherited from Sunline, which really pioneered all this hydrogen stuff in California, and I think pretty much in the whole country. That had a 60 kilowatt UTC fuel cell and 48 Panasonic NiCad batteries. We ran that for a couple of years. Then we had the buses built for us. The gliders were provided by Van Hol, who was providing our buses in those days. And the integration was done by ISC Thunderbolt down in San Diego. And they put in 120 kilowatt fuel cell batteries and 90 kilowatt hour Zebra batteries. Those were sodium nickel chloride batteries, ran at about 700 degrees C. Our experience in Van Hol's was basically the same that New Flyers talked about. So when we went into the advanced demonstration, New Flyer said, look, let us build the whole thing. We are very experienced with electric drive, with our trolley buses and all that stuff. So we'll put it together. Those are the buses that we're using now. They've got 120 kilowatt UTC fuel cell and 21 kilowatt hours of Interdel lithium ion batteries. The first buses had cost us about $3.2 million. The buses we're running now cost us about 2.5, and Sal will talk about how well they're running. What we're now purchasing is the bus David described, and as he described it, we've gone from a fuel cell dominant to a battery dominant. So it's an 85 kilowatt Ballard fuel cell, 110 kilowatt hours of A123 batteries. They're at about 1.2 million, and we think that if we can put together a 100 bus order, we can get it down to the $800,000, $900,000 range. All of these buses fuel in about 6 minutes. We can fuel a fuel cell bus in basically the same time it takes us to fuel a diesel bus. We're moving on to a couple of other things. As David described, we've got the 60-foot fuel cell bus that's coming to us. We're getting 5 of the Excelsior battery-only buses, battery electric buses. And so we're going to be able to run comparisons between the fuel cell electric buses and the battery electric buses. We've also got Excelsiors in diesel and diesel hybrid. So we'll be able to come up with some good numbers. CTA and NREL are going to run much of the analysis on that. Now, let me turn it over to Sal to talk about how that fleet has worked and the training program that he's put together.
Thank you, Director Peoples. So Leslie talked a little bit about this. So the Federal Transit Administration and the Department of Energy established performance targets for the fuel cell electric bus technology to be able to assess the commercial viability. And one of the things that was very important for AC Transit is to be able to challenge the technology to that level. And we made a commitment early on in 2013 that we were going to start running these buses like any other public transit bus and put them up against our diesel buses and see how they're going to perform was going to be the only way that we're going to be able to try and reach these targets. So we click on the slide, we can see some of the advancements that we were able to accomplish. So we're really proud to say that 5 of the fuel cells met the target in 2016, which is the 18,000 hours of operation. We also the bus availability also ranged very equivalent to the diesel buses. And by October of 2016, 11 of the fuel cells achieved the target by 2017. And then once we did that, we wanted to, in a rapid pace, go after the ultimate target, not knowing if we're going to ever achieve that, because as Leslie mentioned earlier, the engineers of the fuel cells only guaranteed the fuel cell for no more than 3,000 hours of operation. They didn't expect it to last more than 4,000. So here we are surpassing 18,000 hours, and we're just wondering what's going to be next. So fuel cell 7, which is one of the original fuel cells, we reached at 25,000 hours in June of 2017, and ultimately reached more than 32,000 hours of operation. We retired that fuel cell literally about a month ago because it was still producing energy, just not enough to keep the bus running the full route. So now we already have established what looks like the end of life for a fuel cell, and we have a report that we're creating internally to see what those matrices look like. But we're proud to say that 10 of the fuel cells have met the ultimate target already, and collectively combined between the earlier and deployment and existing deployment, we have over 356,000 hours of fuel cell operation. And we have more than 3.2 million miles of clean zero emission public transit that we have deployed. So moving on, what we did in November of 2017, we engaged with the Center for Transportation and the Environment, with CTE, because we wanted to really get an understanding of what the zero emission bus technology can do and how it would fit into AC Transit's route profiles. So while we commissioned them for a study, and the essential component of the study was we took all of our routes, all of our blocks, and we broke them apart into 3 different categories, which is a flat route, more of a local service, hilly route. We have some high hills, as Director Peoples mentioned, here in the East Bay area. And then we also do our Trans-Bay route that is mainly for the commuter service. And then we took that and we modeled that into the different size of buses that we have. So as you look at this chart, you're seeing on the left, we have the size, the length of the bus. Then we also try to simulate using some software on what would be the beginning of life range for the batteries and the end of life range using a strenuous operation and a nominal operation. So one would be ideal conditions, the nominal, meaning the operator is perfect, drives the vehicle perfectly on a very flat surface, and the bus really doesn't have a lot of heavy capacity loads. Then strenuous would be, this is the fully loaded bus going on the hills on a hot day with all the components running. And that gave us an assessment of, or an idea of how the vehicles will perform. And what we learned from that is we wanted to match that up on a 1-for-1 basis with just doing what we do today, which is we fuel our vehicles at our depot. So we would charge our vehicles at a depot. And the results that we discovered was 20% of AC Transit's blocks could be served by a battery electric bus on a 1-for-1 basis with a single overnight charge. And 95% of all our blocks can be served by a fuel cell electric bus on a 1-for-1 replacement by fueling the bus one time. So now that we established that we can deploy the fleet and the fleet can meet our route profiles and can serve our customers, we realized that there isn't a readily available pool of highly trained mechanics that know how to operate and maintain a hydrogen fuel cell bus. So we had to challenge ourselves to start to develop that training. And we broke down our training program into hydrogen fuel cell safety and familiarization. We wanted to make sure that our technicians and mechanics understood the do's and don'ts. And then we got a little bit more into specific on the lithium-ion battery safety, fuel cell power plant, and then we have the Siemens Drive system. So once we did that, we realized we started training. All the mechanics have been trained and have to go through this basic safety training program. When the mechanics were going back to the divisions and working in the shops, since we only have 13 buses, they were not exposed to the bus very frequently, which is a good thing, but it's not a good thing when we're trying to gain experience and practice what they learn. So we realized that, and this actually came from our mechanics. We developed a 5-week training program where once the mechanics complete the courses of the safety familiarization, then they're assigned to our trainer where we operate the largest part of our fleet. And they go through a 5-week program learning the basic preventive maintenance inspections, basic diagnostics and repair. Then they also go into more advanced diagnostics and repair. And the way we set up the program is we have 2 mechanics that are new and start the program. And then we're bringing another 2 mechanics halfway. So on week 3, we introduce another 2 mechanics, and the mechanics actually start to teach themselves, and we keep rotating them through. So so far, it's been very successful. We have trained 343 mechanics, have attended zero-emission bus training, and we provided over 16,560 hours. And the other thing that we also do is every single operator is trained on the zero-emission bus. And this concludes our presentation.
All right. Well, thank you, Director Peoples and Sal for that presentation. At this point, we'll turn things over to the Q&A session. We've got a few questions that have come in throughout these presentations. So I'll start with the first that comes to us from Don Curry at North County Transit District, and it's directed at Leslie Udy. And he asks, during your presentation, you compared maintenance costs by system. Were these comparisons made between buses of a similar age, or were the comparisons made between a new hydrogen bus and an old CNG and diesel bus?
That's a good question. We try to match as close to age as possible. So when we first, that's one of the reasons why we switched from the 2008 CNG buses, because we had followed those for a number of years, and then those were at Sunline. So when they got a new set of buses, we switched over to the 2016 model. But yeah, we work with the agencies to try to get the most similar in age and size for the vehicles, so that we're not doing an old versus a young comparison.
All right, thank you, Leslie. So the next question comes to us from David Ginter at Caterpillar, and he asks, what is the capital expenditure for a hydrogen station and station utilization today?
This is Sal Yama, AC Transit. I can take on that question. And so AC Transit has built 2 hydrogen fueling stations. They're capable of fueling up to 12 buses back-to-back in sequence. They provide about 360 kilograms. And the cost averages anywhere from $6 million to about $10 million, depending on how much, if we're going to add an electrolyzer, which we do have on both of our stations to provide some clean, zero emission, some clean hydrogen. So I would estimate about anywhere between $6 million to $10 million for, and this is a station that receives liquid hydrogen, evaporates it, compresses it, and then provides it to the dispenser.
Yeah, and we actually, this is Emmanuel, we actually will have a webinar, the next week's webinar will actually cover infrastructure, so that's a good question to keep in mind for that webinar as well.
All right, thank you both. The next question comes to us from Mitch Ewan at HNEI, and he asks, is AC Transit willing to share your maintenance training resources? Sal, Chris, that's for you.
Absolutely. We're always welcome to share our lessons learned, our experiences, share knowledge, how we develop the program. We're still continuing to develop the program and strengthen our curriculum. What we're learning is now with the new Flyer bus, we have a very strong partner that is going to help us to take it to the next level. But yes, we're always open to help another transit operator as needed.
And I think Sunline's not on today, but I think Sunline is working with the community college down there on their training program, and we cooperate a lot with them and communicate a lot with them. And I know they are also willing to help out with training materials.
All right, thank you both. So the next question is again directed at AC Transit, and it's a question for Sal. It's from Christopher Overmeyer with Parker Hannifin Corporation, and he asks, what was done with the fuel cell that was removed from the bus? And I think that refers to that fuel cell that was retired.
So we actually still have that fuel cell now. We have a process that we have to go through for when we have a asset to dispose of the fuel cell. We have not made a determination on how we're going to do that at this time.
And unfortunately, the manufacturer of that fuel cell no longer manufactures fuel cells. I think with Ballard, you give it back to Ballard, and Ballard recovers all the platinum and all the valuable resources in it and uses it to build new fuel cells.
All right, thank you both. Now it looks like we have no more questions at this time. I'm going to say let's wait for 30 seconds to see if anything comes in, and if not, got a few more slides to go over, then we'll close things out. All right, seeing no further questions, I just want to remind folks on the webinar that we have two more opportunities for engaging with us on fuel cell electric buses in this webinar series. We've got a webinar on infrastructure, as Emmanuel noted, coming up next Thursday. And then finally, we have a webinar on funding these types of ZEB deployments the following Thursday. Now, it looks like we actually just got two more questions in, and so if folks will entertain us for a few more minutes, we'll go ahead and work through them. This question comes to us from Greg Moreland, who supports US DOE through the Oak Ridge National Laboratory contract, and he asks, could you compare disposal of an EOL fuel cell to an EOL battery? Is anyone able to address that?
This is Salyama, City Transit. I don't know that, well, we don't not have the experience to do that yet. We're starting to learn that now. But maybe if someone from Ballard might have more information that they can provide.
All right. Well, thank you. And it looks like we're done now with the questions that come in throughout this webinar. Again, just want to remind you to register for the upcoming webinars if you've not done so already. And do want to make a note that you can contact me if you have any questions about this webinar series, or zero emission bus deployment in particular, and anything that we as an association are doing to better support our members. With that, I want to thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to hosting you again next week. Thank you.